Welcome to Athens Happens. I'm Ben Peters, a news editor at The New Political. Athens Happens is a weekly news podcast brought to you by TNP reporters dedicated to explaining the nuances of Athens and state politics. You can find new episodes every Friday at thenewpolitical.com, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, or wherever else podcasts can be downloaded. In this special episode of Athens Happens, we'll discuss the fate of Brown House, a historic residential home that once housed the university's economics department, then later fell into disrepair. Joining me is Digital Editor Sarah Donaldson, who wrote and produced a feature about Brown House and other historic buildings around Athens. Sarah Donaldson, how are you?
I'm doing really well, Ben. You know, it's sunny out. It's nice. It's like 56 degrees. I did not have to wear my winter coat, which always makes me happy when it starts to be winter. So I'm feeling good.
So we were recording this on the 10th of November on a Sunday. This will probably go up over Thanksgiving, OU's Thanksgiving or winter break. We don't know yet. So if it's Christmas time and you're listening to this, Merry Christmas. So Sarah Donaldson, you wrote and produced a pretty lengthy feature along with a nearly 10-minute video about Brown House, a building that was recently demolished at OU. What is Brown House?
So Brown House was a 4-story building. It sat at the top of Jefferson Hill, so it was kind of on the corner of East Union Street and University Terrace. It was a historic building about 90 years old. It was built in 1928, but the university actually didn't acquire it until 1964. It was named after Mildred Frances Brown, so I did a little research just kind of like on the background of it. She was the original owner of the home before the university bought it. And her grandfather was actually like a pioneer of Athens. So he contracted 3 of the oldest buildings on the Ohio U campus, including Cutler Hall, which is that like big building that sits at the center of College Green.
Do you know what happens in Cutler Hall?
I honestly think it's just administrative offices at this point. I don't think there are like any classes or anything in Cutler Hall.
Okay.
But Ohio University purchased the property in 1964. I know it housed the economics department at first, and at one time it also housed the Contemporary History Institute, but immediately before its demolition, it was vacant, kind of due to just some of the conditions of the house.
Where is it located, or where was it located?
So it was at the top of Jefferson Hill. It's on the corner of East Union Street and University Terrace. It's kind of like on the corner edge of where a lot of these small houses start. So there's a lot of small houses on East Union, a lot on College Green, and on Park Place, like 29 Park Place and 31 Park Place.
So this building, recently demolished, historic. What made it historic? Why should somebody care maybe that this old building that really nobody seemed to know of, was removed?
Well, you know, it was a 90-year-old structure. It was a different type of architectural structure than kind of something that we might be seeing built right now. It was pretty integral to the university's like campus fabric too. It took up a large portion of Jefferson Hill. It kind of ran down the hill. And it was just, you know, I personally, I wasn't super familiar with the building because obviously it was vacant at the time I started being a student here.
Yeah.
But a lot of the historians that I talked to and the preservation advocates that I talked to said, you know, that's one of the houses that kind of like builds this like fabric that we know of campus. All these houses that we see that we're walking past every day, they create this picture of campus.
Yeah.
And when you demolish one of them that is kind of, you know, historic, it's been there for a long time, it's from a different time almost, it's like you're kind of destroying a piece of history.
Yeah, it's the aesthetic of College Green.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So why did the university decide to demolish it?
Okay, so the university's decision to demolish Brown House kind of goes back to what is called the small house planning strategy. So it's a study that was done to look at residential style homes. So you, again, think of these small houses that are kind of, you know, a big part of what OU's campus looks like. There are a lot of residential houses that are on College Green. They're along University Terrace and Park Place, like the big yellow house that you kind of walk past when you're going to class, maybe.
Old President's Mansion.
Yes, the old President's Mansion. A lot of those houses need major maintenance and renovation. They're older structures, and the university has kind of had this problem of routinely deferring maintenance on them, Brown House being one of them. So a couple of years ago, they did this study, and they kind of organized these 15 small houses on the strategy into 3 groups. So the first group was compiled of small houses that work well for current use. Group 2 was compiled of houses that should still be like kind of used by the university, but their use should be repurposed. So maybe instead of being vacant, they kind of want to, do maintenance on the house, kind of build it up, and then have a new use for it. So maybe they move over like a different part of the university, or they like one department moves into that building instead of being housed somewhere else. And then group 3 is compiled of houses that should be considered for alternative city or community use. Brown House fell into group 3 as well as Pilcher House and Jennings House, and I'm going to talk about Pilcher House like a little later.
Okay.
But Brown House was one of the ones that was kind of, the university decided that they didn't really want to use it anymore. It had really fallen into disrepair. I think probably, and this is me just, guessing, but I think of the 15 houses, it was probably the one that was in the worst shape. And it does have to do with, we've got the small house strategy, and then we get to March 2019, and there's a board of trustees meeting.
Okay.
And at this board of trustees meeting, Shauna Bolin and Deborah Schaefer, they're 2 university administrators, they wrote a memo kind of making some recommendations about both Brown House and Pilcher House. And based on Brown House's like need of significant deferred maintenance, and it had really pretty bad mold issues as well in the house. There were also structural issues because it's kind of built, if you look at where Brown House was, there's a big empty lot now on Jeff Hill, but it's kind of built into the hill, and this caused a lot of structural issues. I know we were talking about it with Tom Sudis this week. He's a professor here. He actually had class in Brown House at one time, and he remembers that like the staircase would kind of shift when he walked up it. I don't know if it had to do with the house. I don't know a lot about, like building structures or anything, but I think because it was built on that hill, it kind of had these structural issues, and it was having a lot of issues with like water getting into the house too. So based on all of these kind of structural issues, Schaefer and Bolin recommended to the Board of Trustees that they should demolish the building, but they want to retain the site for university use, so they weren't really interested in like selling Brown House or the site to an outsider, like to the city maybe, or to maybe a private buyer, because they feel that this site has, significant, like its location is really important to the university because it is right on the college green. So based on that kind of recommendation, the Board of Trustees voted in March to demolish the house, and
March of
2019.
Okay.
So that this was this last March. Well, not last March of this year. And so after this vote, it moved pretty quick. The building was demolished in July, and there was only a single bid on it, which some people have kind of raised concerns about the fact that there was only a single bid on the house.
What do you mean a single bid?
So there was just one person who, and it was a construction company. They bid on buying this house to demolish it, essentially. It was just one company. There were no other bids on it. And the only other kind of thing that comes into play, who I'm also going to talk about later, is Brett Adams. He kind of came in the 11th hour in July when he found out that this house was being demolished, and he was kind of alerted by some historians in the area that were concerned about the demolition of this house. He tried to buy the house from the university, and he wanted to repurpose the house for like private use, but the university said it was too late in the process and that they were going to be demolishing it. Another thing that is really interesting that comes out of this March 2019 Board of Trustees meeting is in this recommendation that Bolin and Schaefer made, they said that the cost of the demolition was going to be between $275,000 and $400,000. That was going to be about the total cost of the demolition. And this is of Brown House. And additionally, when they did this demolition of Brown House, they also demolished a little like maintenance building at the bottom of Jefferson Hill. So it was actually 2 buildings that they demolished. But that total cost in March, they were saying it was going to be between $275,000 and $400,000. When it was demolished in July, and it ended up costing the university about $800,000, which was like double the cost of what they initially thought it was going to be.
Do you know why that is?
So I talked to Steve Wood about it. He is the, I think he's the chief officer for facilities and management safety. I'd have to check on that title, but I think that's his official title. But he works with the university and with facilities. And he said that it had to do with, they were demolishing these 2 structures, and there were also mold issues. So they had to abate the mold in Brown House.
What do you mean abate?
they had to just kind of like do like treatment on the mold because again, not a process that I know a lot about, but I do know, like, for example, they demolished a King's by my house like a while back.
And you live in Pittsburgh.
I live in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And that building, I think it had mold issues in it. So they had to like do like a specific treatment on the mold. So if you've got a place that's got like mold or asbestos or something, you can't just like knock the structure down because they have these like fungus issues or like,
and the debris will still have that fungus.
Absolutely.
Presumably.
So
Okay.
a lot of things that like kind of played into the cost with Brown House, according to Steve Wood. He said that, you know, it was the demolition of Brown House and this maintenance building. It was called Edge Hill Maintenance Building. But the costs also were related to the mold, kind of the abatement of mold. And they did design services on the hillside. They kind of restored the hillside so it looked, I guess, a little more normal to campus and not just like, hey, we knocked down this building over the summer. Here's this like weird empty looking lot. So I think they probably had to like replant grass and stuff like that. Because honestly, if you look at the hill now, it kind of just looks like an empty plot of grass.
Yeah.
It doesn't really look like there's been a building that was knocked down there. For me, it was kind of, I walked past that building a lot last year, so I remember it, but I've only been a student here for like a year and a half. So like, I don't have a lot of memories of it. For freshmen here, that's like the new normal, is there's not a building at that plot. So that, I think, was what, for me, when I started on this story, I think that was kind of the sticking point for me about what was really interesting about a story like this, is like, the university demolishing these buildings that like some people, they've been like this integral like part of like walking around campus, and now that's just like gone. But to other people, it's like a new normal. Like they didn't even know that building like existed. And I kind of had that same feeling about and I wanted to talk about it a little later. Did you guys know, so there was an old historic building behind where Buffalo Wild Wings is. There's like a big empty lot.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that until I started researching this story, because I just like always I'm walking to Bentley from my dorm and there's just like this big empty lot, but there used to be like a historic building there.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, that was another one that was demolished recently.
So you've said numerous times that the university deferred maintenance on a lot of these structures, including Brown House. Why exactly?
So the Athens News ran a pretty comprehensive story about deferred maintenance back in 2016 when there was another old building that was demolished on campus. And Shauna Bolin, same university administrator, kind of talked about the fact that, you know, Ohio University's campus is old, which means it comes with a lot of old buildings, and it can be really expensive to continually like, you know, continue to do maintenance on all of these buildings. So it kind of starts to pile up. They keep deferring on it and it starts to pile up because it to me, it would seem like the easier thing to do would just be to fix the problem when it happens. But the university doesn't always have that type of money. So they have to keep deferring. I mean, this is kind of what the university said. They have to keep deferring, and it kind of gets backlogged, which is why I think that this they kind of came up with this comprehensive study about all the small houses, because there are a lot of really old buildings on campus. I mean, all of these small houses are considerably historic. I know there's that log cabin that's kind of on Richland Avenue.
Right.
That building is, I think, the oldest building in Athens, and that's another one that's got a lot of deferred maintenance on it. I mean, it's either 29 or 31 Park Place, the big yellow house that used to be the old president's mansion. Right. The president doesn't even live there anymore because it's not livable, and I think they are doing maintenance on that, and they're kind of restructuring what they're going to be using that building for. But there are a lot of these older buildings on campus that are not being used because that maintenance has kind of backed up. I think it's a cost thing. I think especially when you see like, I think it all ties back to the budget and the fact that we're seeing less people are coming to OU. You know, enrollment has kind of been dropping, and we're kind of going into this budget crisis. So there's not that like extra money that it's like, yes, let's do maintenance on all these houses that like need this maintenance.
Right. So a lot of local activists aren't happy about Brown House and a lot of the other small houses being demolished. What's their side of the story?
So I talked to two preservation advocates, one that I featured in the story, but I met Tim Traxler. He was not in the story that I wrote, but I kind of talked to him for a while.
Tim Traxler?
He is a historic preservation advocate, and he's lived in Athens for like 40 or 50 years. He's been here for a long time. And I also met Tom O'Grady. I did write about him in the story. He's the director of development and outreach at the Southeast Ohio History Center. So he's another preservation advocate. And, it's really vital to meet with people on stories about the history of an area, people who have been here for a long time, because they're the ones watching the landscape change. I mean, we as students are only here for a couple of years, and then we're probably going to move somewhere else. But they're the ones that are here seeing this landscape change. So they kind of have developed this interesting relationship with the university. And this was something O'Grady really pushed to me, because it's hard. He wants to fight for all these buildings, but he also doesn't want to be adversarial towards the university. And we talked a lot about the fact that, and I quoted him on this in the story. He said, "We're not talking about an old barn getting torn down. We're talking about houses and institutional buildings that have been part of our experience for every day that we are on this campus or in this town." And that is true. If you look at a timeline of these demolitions, it's not like small maintenance buildings like the one that was deferred or that was demolished over the summer with the Brown House demolition. It's also historic buildings that people have taken classes in, or dorms that people have lived in that have been getting torn down. I mean, there was also a small building on Factory Street that I didn't even know existed that was also demolished over the summer and was I think it was it was about 100 years old. It was, a dance hall at one point, and they demolished that because the university demolished that building because it's going to be part of the osteopathic, the School of Osteopathic Medicine or whatever. They're kind of, I think that's the school that it's kind of moving out towards that way. So they needed space for that. But O'Grady and I also talked a lot about the fact that historic buildings, we think, and I kind of had this misconception going into it, that if a building is historic in nature, if it's older than 100 years old, it can't really be touched. But that's not necessarily the case. Now, Brown House was not 100 years old. It was 90 years old. It would have been 91 years old this year. Yeah. And there's this National Register of Historic Places, which is kind of an online database that you can get a historic building registered on. And it helps to document these historic landmarks or buildings. And it also protects them. So if there's a federally funded project that could impact that building, so if the federal government is doing something that could impact that building and it could be at risk of being demolished, if it's on the National Register of Historic Places, that kind of protects it. But beyond that, there really aren't many protections for historic buildings. So there were 3 buildings. The President Street Academic Center, which is the building that I was talking about a little bit ago. It was right behind where Buffalo Wild Wings is. Brown House, and then there's also, so in 2013 there was the tuberculosis ward up at the Ridges. That was another historic building that was demolished that kind of raised the ire of a lot of historic preservation advocates in the area. They were all on the National Register of Historic Places, and all 3 of them were demolished. So it's just, there's not really a ton in the way of protections for these buildings. So that's hard when it comes down to, the university's not really fighting for these historic buildings. It's kind of, if it fits the university's needs, they're going to keep it. But if not, it's on the chopping block. So it kind of is up to, there's no real legislative or, laws in place to protect these buildings. So it kind of falls onto community members and activists and stuff like that. But, Traxler and O'Grady both talked about how they do want to work with the university. I think my favorite quote was, O'Grady said to me, "I really want what's best for this community. I'm not looking to draw any lines in the sand. I know you can't save everything, but I know we should be trying to. And if we can't, we can't, but I'm not 100% sure we're trying." And another thing that I didn't really talk about in the story, but that O'Grady and I talked a lot about, was the fact that a lot of the people who are making the decisions right now at Ohio University when it comes to these buildings are people who aren't really here long enough to see the impacts that these decisions have. So, there's only been one university president, according to O'Grady, in recent history that's kind of stuck around in Athens after the fact. Most university presidents kind of come here, serve their term, and then they move out of Athens. And additionally, most members of the Board of Trustees don't live in Athens either. I almost wonder if historic buildings are more vulnerable here because of the nature of a college town with a population that doesn't really move here to stay here. It's students coming in, doing their schooling and leaving. It's professors coming in, being a professor for so long. And I mean, some professors are here for a very long time, but others are not here for that long. And then kind of moving on. It's presidents and, these higher ups that are moving here for the positions that they're getting at the university and then kind of leaving Athens. So I almost wonder, after doing all this reporting on this story, if these historic buildings are more vulnerable because there's not this like wide base of community members beyond these advocates to kind of say, hey, like this building's been around for a while. I really don't want to see it go. So, yeah.
So you mentioned that this past summer there was another building other than Brown House. I don't recall what it was. Which building was it?
So there was a small building. It was not a like super large building. There was a small building on Factory Street. It was at 9 Factory Street. It was a little more off campus. It was just like a small building. I don't know what its use was for, but it was demolished. And there have been, so I've kind of talked about it, but just going through like kind of a quick timeline. In the past decade, there have been a fair amount of demolitions on campus, both of quote unquote historical buildings, so buildings that are, more than like 75 years old.
Right.
And then also, some of the dorms on back south have been demolished. I think ultimately all 9 or all 15 are going to be demolished. So in 2013, the former tuberculosis ward, which was building 26 at the Ridges, was demolished. And this demolition met a ton of adversity from community members, which I thought was really interesting. All of City Council was opposed to this demolition. Mayor Steve Patterson, who I think was currently serving on City Council, but he might have been mayor at that time. Also, they all kind of, voted to kind of say to the university, hey, like, do not demolish this building up at the Ridges. So the city was kind of being very on the defense about this building, and the university said, nope, this is why we're demolishing it, and we're going to demolish it, and it got knocked down. So that was one demolition that was really interesting, because it's kind of pitting the city against the university, which we do talk a lot about how the university and the city don't always have this like super friendly relationship, and it seems like it's kind of maybe working more toward that. But in that case, like City Council was opposed to it. Mayor Steve Patterson was opposed to it. There were a lot of historic preservation advocates that were opposed to it. So that was like a really interesting case. And the university did say like one of the problems that they were having with the former tuberculosis ward was that there was a lot of trespassing, and you kind of hear that with students going up to the Ridges and kind of breaking in to take pictures or do whatever.
Yeah.
But that was one of the issues they cited with the TB ward. And then in 2016, the President Street Academic Center, which was a former science hall, was demolished. This was another one that was met with like kind of a lot of adversity from historic preservation advocates. They wanted to know, why can't you just repurpose this building? Why does it need to be knocked down? It's an educational building. People have taken class there. It's been on campus for a very long time. But they demolished that building. From 2016 to 2017, there were... it was Bro, Katie, Foster, Fenzel, Martzolf, and Oblenis houses. Those were all back south dorms. They were demolished.
Oh, wow. I've never even heard of those.
Yeah, so there were a bunch on back south that were demolished that are, kind of now plots of grass that, us as students didn't know about. And then this summer, the kind of second phase of back south dorms were demolished. So it was Smith, Atkinson, Armbruster. This summer, the historic building at 9 Factory Street is demolished. There was also another building, Building 20, up at the Ridges that was demolished. I didn't find as much information on the Building 20 at the Ridges, but I think I don't know. I think it was one of the newer buildings up at the Ridges. It wasn't as old as like the tuberculosis ward.
Right.
And then Brown House was also demolished this summer. So there were a lot of buildings knocked down this summer. There were and there's a lot of construction going on campus right now, but there were a lot of buildings that were kind of knocked down over the summer. And then next summer, I know that they are going to continue to demolish some of those back south buildings. And that's something Steve Wood mentioned to me, that I said, are there any other buildings right now that you kind of see in the future that are going to maybe be at risk of demolition? And he said right now the only thing that's kind of on the list are those back south dorms. There are no other small houses that are at risk of demolition, at least according to Wood. And the other house that, is kind of in bad shape is Pilcher House.
What is Pilcher House?
So Pilcher House is actually right next to us in Schooniver Center. If you look out the window, it's that little building right there. Yeah, that building is much older than Brown House. I think it was built in the 1800s, I think like 1881 or something like that. Currently vacant, but with that house, and that was one of the other recommendations in that memo that Bolin and Schaefer made at that March 2019 Board of Trustees meeting. For Pilcher House, they are looking for third-party interest, which is something I haven't really gotten to. Brett Adams, he's kind of another key piece in this Brown House story.
Okay.
So I haven't talked a lot about Adams, but I got to meet Adams.
Who is he?
So he is based in Columbus. He's an attorney, and he's an Ohio U grad, and he also buys property in Athens. He's like a contractor in Athens.
Okay.
He heard about Brown House getting demolished kind of at the last minute. I think he found out about it from some of these historic preservation advocates,
right?
Especially because he's kind of been working with the university and with the city, kind of buying property and stuff in this area. So in July, at kind of the start of July, he started emailing Shauna Bolin about the fact that he was interested in purchasing Brown House. And, his thought process was kind of, the university's going to spend $800,000 to knock down this building. I still don't know what the university is going to use that plot of land for. He was like, why don't I save the university money, instead buy it from them? We can save the house and they don't have to, bring on that extra cost.
Right.
And the university was very quick to say, no, we're too far in the process. We're not going to meet with you. They refused a meeting with Adams.
Too far in the process of what?
I guess demolishing the
it,
building.
okay.
No, I don't think they had actually started demolishing the building.
Right, but the administrative
But yeah, it was
process
kind of
leading up
it
to
was
that.
kind of at that point. And now Adams didn't really get a huge explanation on that. It was just kind of, we are too far in this process. So it doesn't really attribute to much more than that. It was kind of, he didn't get a meeting. There was no consideration of Adams buying this house. It was like the university had this bid on the demolition and they were going to demolish the house. And they mentioned that if he was interested, they could show him around Pilcher House if he was interested in maybe saving Pilcher House, buying Pilcher House. Although there's no real imminent threat of demolition of Pilcher House right now. They're just kind of looking for third-party interest.
Did he indicate in any way that he is interested in Pilcher House?
So he did email back. He emailed Bolin back. There was kind of a string of emails with the two of them, which he sent to me.
Okay.
He told them that he'd love to see Pilcher House and that he was actually coming to the university in a couple of days, like he was visiting campus. And they never got back to him about him touring Pilcher House. So he came to Athens and nothing really happened. He was trying to schedule meetings and stuff, and he wasn't really able to lock down a meeting or anything. And additionally, they kind of got back to him after he had left Athens for that trip, because he's from Columbus, that they would show him around Pilcher House or something, but nothing ever really came to fruition with that. He wrote a letter to the editor. Let's try that again.
Of what publication?
The Athens News,
Okay.
in August, about the fact that the university needed to be held accountable for how they handled the issue with Brown House. So I think at this point, Adams was just, in my talking to him, I think he was just very frustrated with the situation at hand, because he kind of saw it as, the university's spending a lot of money. They're saying that there's this budget crisis. They spent a lot of money to demolish this house, and to him, he thinks the cost needs to be questioned. And
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on, costs with these types of things, but Adams was very adamant about the fact that, there is a plan to demolish one of the elementary schools in the Athens East Elementary. East Elementary is much larger than Brown House. Brown House was not very large in comparison to East Elementary, and it's going to cost about $410,000. Right now, they're looking at about a $410,000 cost to demolish East Elementary. So the fact that it costed $800,000 and the university for Brown House is kind of raises some questions for Adams. And I know he's been doing a lot of public information requesting, trying to get these documents about, why did it cost so much for Brown House? Because, I got an explanation from Steve Wood, but it wasn't like it cost this to do this, it cost this to do this. It was very much, well, these things went into the cost. And it's still something that, coming out of this story, I don't know when the answers will come. I don't know if they'll ever come to me, but it was, to me, interesting to kind of compare the cost of a building that is much smaller in square foot to a massive building in the city, like an elementary school that is being demolished for like half the price. I don't know if it had to do with the mold. I don't know if it had to do with the fact that it was on a hill. I don't know, but I know Adams, that was something that really frustrated him, and the fact that it was like, this is a historic structure. I understand that. And now I will say, I don't think the university ever outright gave Adams a reason as to why they were not interested in selling beyond the fact that they were too far in the process. They told me outright, Steve Wood told me outright that the university was not interested in selling the site. They said it was, important that they had that land. And I know that a lot of the buildings on College Green are owned by the university. A lot of the small houses are owned by the university. There's not a lot on campus that the university doesn't own, that is privately owned. So I think that they were definitely like hesitant about selling something that is like right on campus. And I think that definitely went into it. And Wood said, the university, we were going to demolish the building and we weren't interested in selling the site. And that's not really an explanation that Adams ever got. It was more to Adams. It was kind of like, we're not going to schedule a meeting. We're too far in the process. If you want to look at Pilcher House, we're looking in third-party interest. But beyond that, there's nothing really that we can do for you. So I know there's kind of been a struggle between Adams and the university to try to kind of just get a stronger explanation as to what happened there.
Interesting. So the future of a lot of these other small houses is uncertain then?
Right now, it seems that they're kind of moving around what they're going to be using a lot of these houses for. Like, I know Culinary Services is going to be moving into Trizzolini House, I believe, or one of the other small houses, like the Culinary Services office is going to be moving into Trizzolini House. I think,
Where is Trizzolini House?
I think it's right down on Union Street, but I'd have to check the map. I unfortunately do not know for sure where the location of that one is. Let me see. Yeah, so Culinary Services is moving into Trizzolini House, and then additionally 29 Park Place. I believe 29 Park Place is the former president's mansion.
I think it is.
Because I think 31 Park Place is where the Honors Tutorial College is. But 29 Park Place is going to become an engagement center. So that was something else that Steve Wood told me. So right now, like generally what they're doing beyond Brown House, it doesn't look like any of these other historic buildings are at risk of being demolished. Pilcher House is probably going to be sold in some capacity. I don't know if the city will buy it. I don't know if, a private buyer, someone who's interested in historic preservation will buy it. I don't know what that kind of future use will be for that building. But beyond that, a lot of the buildings, it sounds like they're going to be, kind of their use is kind of going to be repurposed. So
is there anything else you'd like to say about this, Sarah?
No, I don't think so. I think for me, it was a long reporting process. As a student journalist, it's kind of easy to feel kind of afraid of bigger stories like that, but it was a lot of fun to work on a story that took a little bit longer, that I worked on for 2 months and kind of did a lot of reporting on. It took a long time to schedule some of these interviews. I mean, I couldn't track someone down from the university to talk to for I think it took 2 or 3 weeks to get an interview with someone from the university. But it's also just, I think we sometimes overlook how much how much stock people put in historical aspects, but it's really interesting to see how much it means to some people, or how how much time people put into trying to save buildings like these that we kind of walk past every day and don't think much about a building and what its purpose was and how long it's been there, but to some people that is something that's really important, and it kind of made me realize that it was just definitely a really interesting story to report on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
And that wraps it up here on Athens Happens. Make sure to tune in every Friday for new episodes that shed light on the politics that impact all of our lives. Remember, you can find the show on the New Political's website, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and on YouTube in a video podcast format. Also, be sure to check out our website at thenewpolitical.com, where we regularly report stories on what really happens here in Athens, and follow @thenewpolitical on social media. Thank you all so much. Have a great week.